The penthouse was too quiet. Mary Williams stood motionless before the floor-to-ceiling windows, her reflection a ghostly silhouette against the glittering New York skyline. At 65, she should have been enjoying her retirement, savoring the fruits of building Williams' innovations from A. 5. 000 S. T. A. R. T. U. P. I. N. H. E. R. G. A. R. A. G. E. T. O. A. 5000 startup inheritor Jita $4.7 billion fintech empire. But the congratulatory plaques on her walls felt like accusations now. Her fingers trembled around the tumbler of bourbon, the same brand she'd toasted with when they went public. The ice cubes had long melted, just like her peace of mind. On the coffee table lay the third anonymous letter this month, its jagged handwriting screaming from the page, "They're laughing at your legacy while your son watches." The phone rang, startling her. Robert's face flashed on the screen, her brilliant boy, the Harvard graduate she'd mentored to take over the company. She hesitated, her thumb hovering over the answer button. How could she tell her only child that she didn't trust him to uphold the values she'd built this empire on? That the whispers about toxic managers and abused employees were keeping her awake? That the culture of respect and equality she'd fought for might be crumbling under his watch? Not yet, she whispered, declining the call with a stab of guilt. First, she needed proof. Outside, a storm gathered over Manhattan, the first raindrops streaking the glass like tears. Mary took a deep breath, her decision crystallizing with each thunderclap. If no one would tell her the truth about her own company, she would discover it herself, no matter the cost. The bourbon burned as she drained the glass. Tomorrow, Mary Williams would disappear. And Janet Smith, a 68-year-old widow desperate for work, would apply for a janitorial position at Williams Innovations. The private investigator's studio smelled of coffee and stage makeup, the harsh fluorescent lights exposing every wrinkle Mary Williams didn't actually have. She sat stiffly in the barber's chair, watching in the mirror as her reflection, the powerful CEO, the industry titan, was systematically dismantled. "Hold still," murmured Elena, the makeup artist, as she dabbed liquid latex at the corners of Mary's eyes. The adhesive pulled at her skin, the discomfort nothing compared to the surreal feeling of watching her familiar features disappear beneath layers of prosthetic aging. Liver spots bloomed across her hands as the artist stippled them with a tiny brush, each brown mark another step further from the woman she'd been. The wig came last, a dull silver bob that smelled faintly of synthetic fibers. As the stylist pinned her real hair flat, Mary caught a glimpse of her mother in the mirror's reflection, the resemblance so startling she had to look away. "You're sure about this?" asked the investigator, holding out the final touch, a pair of drugstore reading glasses with thick, smudged lenses. Mary took them without hesitation. "I built this company seeing what others ignored," she said, her voice already softer, meeker. "Now I need to see what they're hiding from me." She stood slowly, exaggerating the stiffness in her knees, testing the weight of the persona. Janet Smith didn't stand like a CEO. Janet Smith hunched her shoulders, kept her gaze lowered, made herself small in a world designed to overlook her. The ID badge felt alien in her hand, no golden WI logo, no founder and CEO title. Just a grainy photo and the name Janet Smith in block letters beneath employee number 40719. In the elevator down to the street, a well-dressed businessman didn't glance up from his phone as she shuffled in beside him. When she accidentally brushed his arm, he recoiled as if she'd burned him. "Mary, no," Janet murmured an apology no one heard. The transformation was complete. The service elevator groaned as it ascended, its flickering fluorescent light casting sickly shadows across Mary's, no, Janet's, new uniform. The coarse fabric scratched at her skin, the cheap detergent smell clinging to her like a second layer of shame. Her cart rattled with dollar store cleaning supplies, a warped mop, off-brand bleach that stung her nostrils, rags that might have been old t-shirts in another life. When the doors shuttered open on the 38th floor, the gleaming hallway stretched before her like a runway to humiliation. The air smelled of lemon polish and something sharper, power, maybe, or the metallic tang of fear. Somewhere down that corridor, Gerald Hayes held court. His Ferragamo loafers appeared first, stopping just inches from her bucket. "You must be the new meat." His voice was deceptively smooth, the kind of tone one might use to compliment a fine wine before spitting it out. Mary kept her shoulders rounded, her gaze fixed on the damp spot where his drink had dripped onto Italian leather. "Yes, sir." Gerald produced a white glove from his breast pocket with a magician's flourish. He dragged it along the baseboard, then held up the barely grayed tip between thumb and forefinger like a soiled tissue. "Filthy." The word hung in the air between them. He dropped the glove into her bucket with a splash that speckled her shoes. "Do it again." And this time. He leaned in close enough for her to smell his cologne, something expensive and woodsy. "Try caring." As his footsteps receded, Mary's fingers clenched around the mop handle. The water had gone cold. Somewhere behind the taste of bile in her throat, the ghost of Mary Williams stirred, the woman who'd stared down venture capitalists and broken glass ceilings. But Janet Smith just wiped her hands on her apron and got back to work. The tile shone when she finished. Perfect. Flawless. Gerald returned as she was wringing out the mop. Without a word, he overturned a half-full coffee cup onto the floor. Dark liquid spread like a bloodstain across her freshly cleaned surface. "Oops," he said, not sounding sorry at all. Mary watched the pool expand, the reflection of her disguised face warping in the spreading liquid. This was only the first night. Somewhere in the building, a clock struck midnight. Somewhere in her chest, something hard and unyielding took root. Days dissolved into a numbing rhythm of degradation. Mary, no, Janet, learned to move through the halls like a ghost, shoulders hunched, eyes downcast, her once proud posture broken into the shuffle of the invisible. The nights stretched long and cruel, each shift a fresh lesson in humiliation. Derek Phillips, with his designer stubble and perpetually raised eyebrow, made her reorganize his office 3 times in one night. "The pens go here," he snapped, jabbing a finger at a silver tray she could have sworn wasn't there before. "And the files are alphabetical, Janet. ABC, surely even you can manage that?" His laughter followed her into the hallway, sharp as shattered glass. Veronica Wells was worse. The VP never raised her voice, she didn't have to. A single manicured nail tapping against a desk could silence an entire floor. One evening, as Mary polished the conference table, Veronica accidentally knocked over her latte. The scalding liquid splashed across Mary's hands, but Veronica didn't so much as glance up from her phone. "Clean it," was all she said, stepping over the spreading puddle in her $1,000 heels. The HR office offered no refuge. When Mary mustered the courage to report the abuse, Karen Mitchell barely looked up from her computer. "Janitors don't file complaints," she said, her smile as polished and empty as the lobby's marble floors. "If you can't handle the work, there's always Walmart." But the breaking point came on the 42nd floor. Maria, the young janitor from Ecuador, was sobbing in the supply closet, her shoulders shaking as she clutched a crumpled photo of her son. Gerald had made her scrub the same patch of floor for an hour, berating her for a smudge only he could see. "You people are replaceable," he'd hissed, flicking her name tag so hard it left a red mark on her cheek. Mary reached for Maria's trembling hands, and froze. Her own fingers, once perfectly manicured, were now raw and cracked from bleach. The diamond ring she'd worn for 30 years was gone, tucked away in a safety deposit box. In its place was a thin band of pale skin, a ghost of the woman she used to be. That night, as she rode the service elevator down, Mary didn't see a CEO in the scratched metal reflection. She saw Janet. And for the first time, she understood what it meant to be powerless. The realization burned worse than Veronica's coffee. Worse than Gerald's sneers. Worse than anything. Because now, she wasn't just uncovering the truth. She was living it. The janitor's closet smelled of ammonia and damp mops, the single bare bulb flickering like a dying heartbeat. Mary crouched in the cramped space, her knees protesting against the cold concrete floor as she adjusted the tiny recording device hidden inside a box of latex gloves. The weight of it in her palm felt absurdly small for what it might reveal. Her hands shook as she pressed record. The executive meeting room was empty when she slipped in, her rubber-soled shoes silent on the polished marble. She placed the device beneath the conference table, its magnetic casing clinging to steel with a barely audible click. For a moment, she hesitated. This was illegal. This could ruin her. Then she remembered Maria's red-rimmed eyes. The way Gerald's coffee had scalded her skin. The sound of Veronica's laughter as she stepped over her. Mary set the timer. 3 hours. Enough to catch whatever poisonous words might spill in the boardroom after hours. She retrieved it at 1:17 a.m., the building so quiet she could hear her own pulse in her ears. In the custodial break room, under the hum of the vending machine, she plugged the device into her laptop. The voices spilled out like venom. Robert's too soft, Gerald's voice, smug and oily. Asterisk, the board's already questioning his leadership. Another quarter of missed projections, and they'll vote him out. Asterisk. A clink of glass. Veronica's laugh, sharp as a blade. Asterisk, and then? We split the subsidiaries. Dumped the underperforming assets. The Singapore group offered twice market value for the data algorithms. Asterisk. Mary's breath caught. Careful, Karen's voice, cool and measured. Asterisk, we do this by the book. Manufacturing a leadership crisis is one thing. Corporate espionage is another. Asterisk. Please, Derek's nasal whine. Asterisk, by the time anyone pieces it together, we'll be sipping Mai Tais in the Caymans. Asterisk. The recording ended with the scrape of chairs, the clatter of expensive shoes on tile. Mary sat perfectly still. The room tilted. This wasn't just cruelty. It was treason. Her son wasn't failing the company. He was being sabotaged. The mousepad beneath her fingers was damp. It took her a moment to realize her palms were sweating. Another to notice the hot, furious tears streaking down her face. She wiped them away with the back of her hand, Janet's hand, rough and chapped, and reached for her phone. Robert answered on the first ring. Mom? His voice was groggy with sleep. It's 2 in the... Baby, she whispered, the word cracking like thin ice. Asterisk, we need to talk. Asterisk. Outside, the first light of dawn crept over the skyline, pale and tentative. Mary Williams was done hiding. The boardroom hummed with the quiet tension of a storm about to break. Gerald Hayes adjusted his French cuffs as he took his customary seat at the mahogany table, his smirk as polished as the silver coffee service before him. Across the room, Veronica Wells checked her reflection in a compact, the diamonds at her wrists catching the light with every practiced movement. Robert Williams stood at the head of the table, his knuckles white where they gripped the chair back. Before we begin, he said, his voice cutting through the murmur of conversation, there's someone you need to hear from. The service door creaked open. All eyes turned as Janet shuffled in, her gray uniform hanging loose on her frame, her cleaning cart rattling behind her. A few board members frowned, one rolled his eyes. Gerald's lip curled. Really, Robert? The help has something to contribute? Then Janet straightened. The transformation was instantaneous. The stoop disappeared from her shoulders. The shuffle became a CEO's measured stride. As silver hair tumbled free from the wig, as she removed the thick glasses, the collective gasp sucked the oxygen from the room. Gerald's coffee cup shattered on the marble floor. Hello, Gerald, Mary Williams said, her voice like a velvet-wrapped blade. Miss me? The screens around the room flickered to life, displaying security footage, audio waveforms, documents. There was Gerald pouring coffee on freshly mopped floors. Veronica slapping an elderly janitor. Karen Mitchell shredding harassment complaints. And clearest of all, their own voices plotting corporate treason. You can't, Derek sputtered, face draining of color. This is illegal surveillance. Karen snapped, but her hands trembled where they clutched her tablet. Mary didn't blink. I own the building. Every square inch. Including, she tapped the table, this very boardroom. As security moved in, Gerald lunged forward. You ruined this, and I swear. You what? Mary stepped closer, close enough to smell his fear beneath the expensive cologne. "Remind me where you'll be when the SEC finishes with you?" She adjusted his crooked tie with a vicious yank. "Ah, yes. Prison." The silence that followed was absolute. When Robert finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of judgment. "Effective immediately, you're all terminated. Your belongings will be boxed. Your access revoked." He nodded to security. "Escort them out." As they were led away, Gerald rigid with rage, Veronica sobbing perfect tears, Derek babbling excuses, Mary met each of their gazes in turn. No pity. No mercy. Just justice. Outside, the morning sun broke through the clouds, washing the city in gold. Mary exhaled, the weight of weeks lifting from her shoulders. It was over. And it was just beginning. 12 months later, sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Williams Innovation's newly renovated executive floor, painting golden stripes across the reclaimed oak conference table. Mary Williams, no longer in disguise, but still wearing the silver bracelet Maria had given her as a thank-you gift, leaned back in her chair and watched her son command the room. Robert stood at the head of the table, not behind it, his sleeves rolled up to reveal the same tattoo his father had gotten during their Peace Corps days. The PowerPoint behind him displayed their latest numbers: employee retention up 73%, whistleblower reports down to 0, and a profit margin that made even the most skeptical investors nod in approval. But the real success, Robert said, clicking to the next slide, a photo of the entire custodial staff grinning in front of a brand new break room, isn't on this spreadsheet. Down in the lobby, the changes were palpable. The security guards now knew every employee by name. The cafeteria had been rebuilt with input from the night shift workers. And on the 42nd floor, where Gerald Hayes' glass-walled office once stood, there was now a bright, open collaboration space, and in its center, a plaque bearing the company's new mantra, "Everyone Matters." Maria, promoted to facilities coordinator, gave Mary a thumbs up from across the room. Her son, the one she'd sobbed over in the supply closet a year ago, now attended the company daycare, his tuition covered by Williams Innovation's new education fund. Mary slipped out of the meeting unnoticed, a skill she'd perfected as Janet, and took the service elevator down to the ground floor. The same janitorial supervisor who'd once tossed her a mop now nodded respectfully. "Ms. Williams." "Ben," she greeted, handing him an envelope. "The board approved your proposal. The new ergonomic equipment arrives next week." His eyes widened. "You mean we're really getting those motorized scrubbers?" Mary winked. "And the heated uniforms for winter." As she stepped out into the crisp autumn air, her phone buzzed. A text from Robert: "Mom. You're missing your own tribute video." She smiled but didn't turn back. Let them celebrate. She had one last stop to make. The small park across the street was empty except for an elderly man feeding pigeons. Mary sat on a bench and pulled a folded envelope from her pocket, the last anonymous letter she'd received, postmarked the day after the boardroom confrontation. Inside, a single sentence. Asterisk, "Thank you for seeing us when no one else did." Asterisk. No signature. No return address. Just those 8 words, written in careful block letters. Mary traced them with her finger, the paper worn soft from months of handling. Somewhere behind her, the Williams Innovations tower gleamed in the afternoon sun, its glass facade reflecting the city it called home. Her legacy wasn't in the building. It was in the people who walked its halls. And finally, she could rest. The next morning, a package arrived at Maria's desk. Inside was a simple keychain, a miniature mop with a single diamond embedded in the handle. The note read, *4 when you need to remember where you came from. And how far you'll go. MW*. Maria smiled and clipped it to her new office keys. Somewhere on a beach in Santorini, a woman in a wide-brimmed hat sipped her coffee and watched the sunrise. Her phone stayed off. And for the first time in 40 years, Mary Williams was just Mary.